All right. Hey, everybody. We've got Isaac Young with us. Very interesting guy. If you follow his Twitter, if you follow his Substack, and got a lot of stuff going on here. Let me do this real quick. I need to do a promo for our stuff because if I don't, my artist will kill me, and he's bigger than me. So, give me just a second. I will present this. I just said I'm going to boomer this, and I just know I am. Here we go. GodfoUniverse.com. We have comics. We have a novel coming out that's been in the works for a while now. We have short films. We have, name it. We've got some writings down here, which is some prose, some poetry, and photography from a very talented photographer. It's a universe unto itself. In this universe, powerful elites have used alien technology to create their own god. Anyone who opposes it is labeled Godfoe. It takes place and is broken up into several eras over thousands of years. We have two books out now: Apollyon 20XX Volume 1, Live Not by Lies, and Biophile Kolga. Both of those are available on our website and on Indiegogo. We have one coming out in December, which is part 2 of this. It'll be Apollyon 20XX Volume 2, Lest We Forget. If you're into comics, pick them up. We do very reasonable prices. And right now for the Indiegogos, we are doing a $5 flat shipping no matter what you get. All right. Pick it up if you're into that kind of stuff. That's why we're here. End of promo. So, guest tonight is Isaac Young. Very interesting guy, as I said. So you came on my radar. We joined Twitter maybe a year ago to sell comics, basically, and get into the comic sphere. That quickly became stale for us, and I started finding interesting people, such as yourself. And you are a busy dude, man. And I'll let you just take a minute to introduce yourself real quick. I don't want to be super formal, but to people who don't know you, would you like to let them get to know you?
Sure. My name is Isaac Young. I'm a Catholic cultural commentator. I do a lot of articles. I do science fiction and fantasy. I've got a lot of projects going on, so I'm kind of stretched a bit thin right now, but I'd say I'm just a guy who hangs out and commentates. Probably the main thing I do.
I think they used to call that lurkers. Well, man, I think you're selling yourself short. So if you don't mind, I'll add to that. You have a very impressive stuff stack. I couldn't even get through it looking at you. Wide variety of topics, and my goodness, dude, you're working on, was it 3 complete different series?
Yeah, right now I'm working on a fantasy series, a superhero series, and a sci-fi series.
I see, and I thought I was busy. I could tell from your sigh. I could tell from the sigh that you're busy. So we've got it here. And if I butcher any of these titles, let me know. The Domes of Calrathia, Giga Heroes, and The Last Human. And I read through these as much as I could before the interview, or whatever you want to call it, hangout. I did really enjoy Giga Heroes. I enjoyed The Last Human. I enjoyed The Domes of Calrathia. Giga Heroes stuck out to me because it seemed, here's the reason, because I'm in comic books, and it seems to me that superhero comics are super stale. Superhero novel is a really cool idea, especially the way he started it. It almost kind of like started like something like Fight Club, like a late 90s kind of feel. Very grungy. It didn't have a sardonic tone, and it didn't have a sarcastic tone. It didn't sound like it was mocking the reader, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, when I was writing it, I wanted to include a bit of a tongue-in-cheek humor, but there's this Marvel humor which I really wanted to avoid, where it looks like the characters step out of the story and wink at the viewer in a very ironic and, oh hey, laugh with me sort of way.
Yeah.
I was trying to avoid that, even though one of my characters does actually reach out and break the fourth wall from time to time. But I was trying to go for a very personalized story where you get really deeply into each character's thoughts and emotions.
Yeah, and you laid out a lot of the foundation of how the world works, even in the first half of the first chapter. By the time I don't want to do spoilers or anything like that, but by the time the character is, I'll just say isolated for the first time, you've already established a lot of the powers, a lot of how the world works, and how they kind of keep superheroes slash supervillains in check. It was very economical writing, which I'm a big fan of. I mean, I like big stuff. I've got Dostoevsky over here. I've got Dune, the classics. And I love that kind of stuff. But to me, it's really impressive, especially in today's age where, and this is something that got popular this week a little bit. I think basically people are just now realizing that all books now are written for women for some reason. It's, it's,
They realize that, they forget it, and then a few months later they realize it again.
yeah,
The
right.
cycle starts up all over again.
Well, it's economical writing. If you write like someone who reads.
Yeah, I would say I was a very voracious reader when I was young. When I was like in my teenager years, I kind of try and keep it steady, but it's difficult. I've got so many projects up in the air, and these three books and articles take up so much of my free time. I'm also trying to start up a YouTube channel as well.
Oh, good
So
luck.
it's just I'm really stretched.
Well, it's hard to do any of that, as you just said, without becoming a slave to the algorithm or just becoming lame. So I applaud you for taking the challenge.
Yeah.
I think we kind of spoke a little backstage. I think the world needs a bit. I hate that I don't have a better term for it. Maybe we can come up with one, but I think the world needs a bit more of punk art, and I don't mean that in the sense of spray painting a crappy A on the side of a wall. I mean basically what we've seen, which is non-regime art, I should say.
Yeah, it's a really sad thing what's happened with the mainstream. I mean, all of it is either so bland it doesn't say anything, or it's just direct propaganda.
Yeah.
Or it's porn. Yeah, you have those three categories.
It seems, and the sad part is, it seems like maybe the porn side of things would be more interesting because at least it's not looked at as much.
Oh, the porn certainly reveals some interesting things about the left's current psyche.
Yeah, and that's what's strange, man. I gotta tell you, like I'm a devout Christian, but I tried my whole life to stay out of the political ideas of everything, of the cycle of everything. But I'll be damned if we weren't dragged into it the past 8 years. And I'm a staunch believer in the separation, not necessarily mutually exclusive, but in the separation of art and politics. I don't believe art is inherently political, but it reached a point where it became so politicized that what do you expect people to do rather other than like hit back with politicized art?
Yeah, I mean, the difficulty is so we can say art is not political,
Mm-hmm.
but the left are going to damn sure make it political.
Oh yeah.
So they kind of drag you into the fight whether you like it or not, and you better take a side. Well, their side. Otherwise, they're going to smear you through the mud. I've known a lot of people who advertise their stuff as apolitical,
Mm-hmm.
but whenever they try to break out into the wider sphere, I mean, they can't get coverage unless they kowtow to LGBTQ diversity, yada yada yada.
Yeah, and that's something. I mean, I've lost friends over this stuff, to be honest, or very close to it, and just for basically not going along with insanity. And especially, I had someone get mad at me because I posted on our Twitter something about sensitivity readers. Like, what a stupid idea! What a not only stupid, not only the only word I can think of is that it's evil. Like a position, because you know what I'm talking about, right? Sensitivity readers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
believe me, I know.
Well, you're putting yourself to say, I speak for all people of whatever X group, and I get to be the filter by which they enjoy a book or don't enjoy it, and I get to tell you what to write about it. I can't imagine that kind of narcissism. Maybe I should work on it. Maybe I should get more of that.
I mean, it's an attempt to exercise power, is what it is.
Oh yeah.
You're basically making people bow down to you and submit to you as a status thing.
Yeah, and that's what was it, that game? I haven't. I am such a noob with video games. I used to play video games all the time, and now I'm basically just do Pokemon because I have 2 kids and a wife, so I have to play something that is turn based. Um, but what was the game that was causing so much controversy because it was so dumb recently? Is it Dragon Age, Dragon Guard? I don't know what it's called.
It was Dragon Age Veilguard. I think that was
That's it.
that was it.
But of course, the clip that went around from it was some lady or whatever on there saying the pulling the bra or whatever concept. It was like she had to do push-ups because she misgendered someone, and that's how her. And all I could think is like the ending, like the whole basically last third of 1984, where O'Brien is beating it into his head that like the best way to control people, the only way you can control people is to inflict pain on them, so you know that it's not their idea. And like that's all I could think as I watched that. I was like, oh my gosh, what satanic idea is this? You've got to beat it into your body like a religion, like a whipping because you misgendered somebody. This is horrific.
Yeah, the thing about 1984 is he predicted the banality of it. He didn't predict how fake and gay it would be. That was George Orwell's flaw as a writer.
What's funny is I wrote that into a Microsoft complaint. They're like, why are you submitting a complaint to Teams or about Teams? I was like, because it's fake and gay. So that's funny. Going with what you said before that, you mind if I pull up some tweets of yours? I mean, this isn't an incriminating thing. It's what I wanted to talk to you about.
Yeah, sure.
He posted one recent said, I knew a dozen RW, which I assume that's right wing guys, who had manuscripts or dreams of becoming an author. How many of those will stick around in today's market? How many of those will be able to refine their craft with zero support? How many of those will see any success? There's your right wing art problem. And this kind of goes into, I think what some people have talked about. Some people have discussed what a parallel economy or a parallel patronage system in that case, but it really is like it is, and it's nothing new. That's not a new idea. Like, go back through history, one political view or one religious view goes rules at a time and suppresses art. It's very strange to see it. I think it's strange for people in a modern neoliberal society to see it happening so blatantly. And the way you framed it, it really got me thinking. I was like, man, we really haven't had to deal with that in our lifetime ever since what people blew up as McCarthyism. McCarthyism isn't what Hollywood says it was. But I don't know. I think you put that very well. And those are very good questions. Like, what are people who maybe not even right wing, but who are people who basically just don't submit to the fake and gay ideas? What are they supposed to do?
Well, hopefully the next 10 years or so, we'll have some real patronage networks up and running. But until then, the best solution right now is to stay anonymous and fund your own work.
Yeah, and I
don't.
Sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt you, man, but no, that's what I found so interesting about you. I know I keep using that word, but it's because, and if I start rambling, just let me know. I have a tendency to do that. I care deeply about art. I'm a Christian, and I care deeply about art because I believe art is the divine incarnate. Even as a man, like that, you can't incubate and create life like a woman can. What men do and what they've done since the beginning of time is create. And art is beautiful and it's wonderful, and it is to take something that's abstract or divine and incarnate it. And it just really hurts me that no matter where I go in music and in comics or novels or whatever, you'll have people that maybe even, like, most don't put out anything of value. And some that do, it always comes down to this phrase, but money. Not OnlyFans, but money. Like, they will work something and make something, but it always comes down to money. And what impressed me about you, and what impressed me about everyone I'm going to have on here, is it seems like the disregard for money. Not to say you don't need it or you don't want it, but making something in spite of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie, it's difficult. Basically, everything that I've done for pennies, or
Hmm.
I've grown to, I get about $30 a month from all my efforts, which,
That's more than most people get.
yeah. So that's something to be really like. It's something to appreciate. I'm not denigrating that, but in terms of, all right, if you want to move on to, you can make this your full time job. $30
Hmm.
a month isn't anywhere near close to that, and most people will never get anywhere near close to making right wing culture their full time job. And those that do typically take on, unfortunately, the worst aspects of streamers and
Hmm.
conservative influencers, and they
Yeah,
sort of need to do that to succeed. It's
yeah,
just
and
hijacking the algorithm.
that's what I'm talking about with you. It seems like at some point everyone, like, we can speak in Christian terms. You said you're a Catholic, and I really want to go down that road in just a minute. Um, and again, if I ramble, just let me know. I'm not going to be offended. But we can speak in these terms such as oh god, now it's going out of my head. The demon that's usually associated with greed. It's not Moloch. But anyway, regardless, we know what that society is. We live in it. We know what it is to it. Everything has to bow to money. And that's what the algorithm is, because now we live in an attention economy. And everything comes down to that now. Everything has to be about attention all the time. And what you just described, that hurts me to see. To see art sacrificed for that. And the only way forward I can think of doing anything interesting for a long term is to not care. And and I know the argument against that. I'm not saying you make this argument, but I've heard it from people who's like, well, what about relevancy? What about power? And that's something I struggle with, is and I would like your perspective on it as a Christian as well as a Catholic. Do you think artists need power of any kind, or need influence of any kind, or need anything like that, or can we just make things and let that reach who it reaches?
Well, I mean, there's two different questions buried in
Yeah,
there.
sorry about that.
So I mean, I would say, all right, if you want to talk in terms of a culture war, as we like to define it, then yes, power absolutely matters. If you want to talk into fulfilling, your vocation is to what God calls you to do, then power is irrelevant.
Yeah,
So for like those are the two conversations nestled in that question. Depends on the context.
that was a great answer. Thank you for that. Actually, I find myself leaning towards the latter because of the biblical story and the biblical canon and the canon of the church. It seems if you lean into that, God provides the power. That's a big statement, I realize. But I think that's the big and I didn't mean to bring this up. And if you don't want to go into this, that's fine. But that's the thing I find in a lot of, I guess, what we have to call right wing sphere, is the concern for power. And I get it; they haven't had it for so long. But that seems to me a conflict or a dichotomy, as you described, power versus, I guess, a pure spiritual or artistic sense. And I'm saying all this, and again, if I'm rambling, let me know. I grew up Protestant. Um, I'm not Catholic, but the reason I found myself drawn to Catholics over the past year or two, because, and if I say you guys, that's what I mean. It seems like it seems like Catholics have a very strong sense of material work and actions that are in conjunction with their spirituality.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, that kind of goes back to like theology in high school, faith and works.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't really know how I would comment on it, except I've always had an emphasis in my spiritual life from people who I respect, including priests, close friends, family members, about uh, creating and doing works alongside, going to church and prayer and all that.
Yeah, and not trying to put this on you. Like I said, if I'm just that fascinates me. Growing, we didn't have iconography. Art was not an important thing. It seems to me that Catholicism has more of a basis for being able to go and create and do things in the world and even be politically involved that the Protestant church struggled with. And that fascinates me. It seems like you guys hit the ground running a little bit better, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would definitely. I've noticed that online and off.
Like it seems to me, and I even told my mother this today. Like I said, and we were technically raised Pentecostal, um, but it's if I had to choose probably one religion that I think America needs mostly, and this is blasphemous coming from my side, I would have to say Catholicism. I think America needs Catholicism more than it ever has.
Well, certainly needs some form of Christianity.
Yeah, definitely. Um. Anyway, I know that's a big deep topic to go into, but
I mean, if I were to speculate on why Catholicism is uh, inclined to those things, I would say Catholicism doesn't have an aversion to the material world that I think Protestants seem to have.
yeah, for
And
political power, it seems.
there's certainly a puritanical strain
Mhm.
where Protestants view the holy as eschewing everything about the material world.
Yeah, it almost gets into Gnosticism.
Yeah. Whereas Catholicism is focused on, oh, I wouldn't say focused, but part of Catholicism is ascending to God through the material world.
Yeah, and I think that's a beautiful thing. And I didn't bring you on here to drag down into a theological conversation, but I appreciate you going there. Um, with that, though, I wanted to bring up another tweet you did, and if you want to promote anything or talk about anything else, just let me know and I'll shut up. Um, just I found a lot of your tweets very interesting, and I found a lot of how you phrase things very interesting. Let me pull up. It was the Game of Thrones recent one, and it's called "Speaking of Gnosticism." I think this had something to do with it. Yeah. Uh-uh. You have a thread about Game of Thrones. For all the hate Game of Thrones rightfully gets, I'm going to temporarily bat for it for a second. I think the West has moved on from Game of Thrones style storytelling, and it gets at a problem modern Christians have to deal with. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but basically, to summarize, you applaud George R. R. Martin for at least trying to take on a post-Christian world because that's what we live in, and that's a very interesting idea. A lot of people, I think, don't want to go there. And you did the same thing with realism. Realistic has become cringe. I don't think the desire for realism is not entirely misplaced. It comes from a desire for something to hold on to, something real, and the right wing should remember that. So,
Uh,
what?
uh, oh,
I'm sorry.
sorry.
No, I was just going to ask, like, what do you think that involves? Looking at the past more, forging forward, or maybe like a synthesis of those two.
Well, first clarify that Twitter thread. I think first off, I think George R. R. Martin, he's not appealing to a post Christian world. He's a product of a post Christian world.
Good point.
So I don't. I think he's a cynic through and through. What I was trying to get at with that Twitter thread was Christianity hasn't exactly put its best foot forward in understanding its place in the modern world, where a lot of people have apostatized and a lot of the foundations which we once took for granted have completely eroded.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people need serious answers again. Uh, they need a response to this abyss that's opened in their lives, and I don't think it's starting to manifest, but I don't think in terms of our art sphere that Christianity has really developed a response to that sort of hell that's kind of opened up in so many people's lives. And I mean, I'd point to the Protestant evangelical movies as an example where,
Such as like God's Not Dead and stuff like that.
Yeah. All those lovey-dovey, you turn to the faith. You're an atheist. All your material, like all the problems compound and compound. You're in debt. You're nihilistic. You're drinking. Your wife hates you. Yada yada yada. You turn to Christianity, and all those things magically get solved.
Yeah, as if that happens, right?
Yeah.
Well,
I think yeah. People desire real answers that approach them in their own lives. This is not to say you should compromise Christianity in any way to reach down to them, but this is to say that Christianity needs to take a very somber look at the real world and realize that we can't sugarcoat any of it.
No, I think that's right, and I think this is kind of like, I hate to use the word vision, but this is kind of the vision I had when I started making art. Was you have to, and I was thinking about the differences between chaos and order, and it seems that that's what the artistic process is. It's venturing into chaos. And I'm not using these terms in a Jordan Peterson sense. I know I have to say I have to say that now. Hey, the guy did a great job bringing Jung to the popular imagination. More power to him. But I'm not using those in those terms. I'm using them in a Christian term or a theological term. You do have to venture into chaos and bring back potential to make anything quote unquote new. But you have to be tethered to order in order to do that. I mean, it literally is that kind of an image in my head of like a guy, with like an anchor or a chain around, going into like an ocean, grabbing something and pulling it back out. And a lot of Christianity, particularly Protestant Christian, and this is, I've got so many things I want to talk to you about. Sorry. A lot of Protestant Christianity has utterly dropped the ball on that, as you just said. And what's so funny is in Protestantism, Catholicism is always portrayed that way, but it's so flipped. Catholicism is always portrayed as like the stuffy thing that won't let you think creatively. And when I look at the differences between the church designs, I'm like, well, that doesn't add up. Like, this one's in a parking lot, and this one's this awesome cathedral with like stained glass and beautiful carved stone. It seems like one of these was way more creative than the other. And that kind of inversion exists everywhere, and that's another thing I wanted to bring up. This thread, you said you watched clips off YouTube, and Westworld would have infinitely been better if it understood Anthony Hopkins was the devil and the man in black was the Christ figure. Instead, we had a demonic God and a sympathetic devil. It was all mixed up. I think that is what you just pointed out. I think that has been the pattern, and that's a Gnostic pattern, has been the pattern for movies, entertainment, and everything popular for maybe 20, 30 years, probably more. I'm just not old enough to remember it. It's almost hard to see anything that isn't just blatantly inverted Gnosticism.
Yeah, especially with the Westworld thing. I think it would have been infinitely more interesting if it understood that the Anthony Hopkins character was the devil. Because you take a look at all of his soliloquies and monologues, mm-hmm. You only need to tweak them a tiny bit, and he is a perfect representation of the devil.
Oh, I agree.
And I would prefer if the man in black were there actually is a Christian archetype in there, because mm-hmm. Christ, I believe this metaphor was used in the Bible. I can't remember where, but it was Christ compared himself to a strong man, who breaks into the devil's house to free I can't. I wish I had this. I had the metaphor prepared on hand, but he's compared to a strong man who robs the devil's house.
Yeah, which is a awesome and ballsy like image.
Yeah, and I would have loved if the Man in Black had been that figure. I don't think he is in like most ways. I think he only has a bit of a reflection in that.
Well, what's funny, and I don't mean this condescendingly, I'm just saying because I remember you before when we were backstage, you mentioned you were maybe on the younger side. I'm 38, so I kind of barely remember this idea. But what's funny is the Man in Black, that was a pop culture archetype of Jesus for a while, particularly with the idea of Johnny Cash and some of the early westerns.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
very well aware of Johnny Cash. He's
Okay.
one of
Well,
my favorite artists.
yeah. But that idea was that the Man in Black that came and distributed justice, usually with a gun, could be the Christ figure, and that was a subversion of some kind at the time, at least for our culture. And this Westworld example you gave is a subversion of a subversion. I don't even think it's a going back to an original idea. I think that's all evil can do at this point, maybe at all, is subvert. And Christianity is a subverting religion. That's the thing is you picture this idea of Christ going to the devil's house, binding him, and stealing his stuff, basically. Sorry, that reminds me of are you a Futurama fan at all?
I watched plenty of Futurama.
I'm going off because I'm thinking of with Nixon going, and I'll go into people's houses at night and bring up the place. Yeah. Sorry, my brain, man. I'm telling you, when you got kids and you don't sleep, your brain starts thinking like spaghetti. But yeah, I love that idea, and that's what gives me hope ultimately as an artist in this world. Is it is supposed to be punk, it is supposed to be a subversive, and it's the real subversion because it's the truth. It is the goodness that came and the true king that came to destroy the evil kingdom that had temporarily supplanted it.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to get into a definition of terms because I
Sure.
view subversion as I view subversion as like just an inherently evil thing. I won't use it like there is a reflection of if the evil is the establishment, then good is technically subversive. But I don't like that that equivalence. I prefer to say if it goes against the good, it's subversive. If it goes against evil but is outside, I don't have another good word to replace it, but I'd prefer subversive. Just I don't know. It's something about that word just strikes me as like the connotations around it.
Oh no, that's a wonderful point. I'd love to go into it. Maybe a justification or a it is interesting to sort of think of the probably the righteous word for that of making something proper. I guess we could just go fall back to some biblical terms such as oh gosh, what's the word I'm looking for? Not salvation.
Salvific.
I've never heard that word before, but sure, why not? No, it's I'm not gonna hold up people too much.
I mean, the problem,
sanctification. Sanctification.
Yeah, sanctification. I mean, the problem I have with subversion is like it's basically a synonym for undermine. Yeah. It doesn't point to any positive vision. It just means undermine.
Good point. That was actually one of my next questions is what, and we've kind of beat around the bush with it, and this is a big question to ask, I know. What do you think of a positive vision for this kind of art moving forward that you make?
So I guess I have to tackle the current scene so far as I see it. So you have, on one hand, you have what we like to call the woke, which I think is just, it's so intellectually shallow. I don't even want to talk about it. It's just narcissism. And then right before that, you have this modernist iteration, which are full of these tropes like transhumanism, liberal democracy as the default good ending, all these sorts of, men and women are exactly the same. all these sorts of tropes that we still take for granted, I think, and we kind of we've internalized them because they were so ubiquitous in our childhood that we still kind of carry them forward, even though we like to style ourselves as reactionaries. And I would say my current project is to try and reach beyond those tropes.
Ooh, big challenge. Not to interrupt you, but wonderful, wonderful challenge. Please go into that, can you?
Yeah, I'm still trying to hash it out in my own head, but I would guess my project is to try and look at pre-modern truths and not reinterpret them, but re-express them in a modern context.
That is a wonderful challenge, man.
Yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult. I try. But I do think that's the future of the right wing art movement in whatever way it expresses itself. It has to reach for truths that we've forgotten, things that we've cast aside, and reintroduce them into the modern culture.
That's an interesting idea, and it's something. I wrote a book. It's part of the Godfo universe. It's actually the first thing I did before we did the novels, or before the graphic novels. I'm sorry, because I figured, hey, if you can write a novel, you can write a comic book, right? And so but it deals with that topic because it takes place so far in the future, and this being, they call God, and they don't even know what God even means anymore. But it has ruled Earth for so long that name has become synonymous with it. But the main character doesn't even realize it, but he's reaching for something beyond that. He doesn't realize he's reaching for a divine idea and for divine morality. He can only call it like the more. And he spends a great majority of the novels trying to articulate that and what that can mean and what it could be. And the closest he could come in the first novel is whatever it was that his mother did whenever she put him and his interest above hers. And so what I'm saying is I applaud you because I'm not I understand part of that struggle. It seems it's a very daunting task.
Yeah, I think people underestimate it because I do think that there's been a great disconnect, especially in millennials and Gen Z, from religious tradition in general.
Yeah, and that's I'm not going to go into a whole personal thing, but that's what blew my mind kind of growing up into my 20s. I got really tired. And just to reiterate, I was a musician for a long time, and I still am. I just put out a record on Halloween, but when you're in that, it it's full of mass narcissism and just very weepy men.
Yeah, that is what the woke is. It's effeminate.
Yeah, and you get around it and you're like, God, how many shows can I go to? How many albums are there of just some guy, especially in the late 2000s? It was religion was playing into it, and everybody was a Christian, but did whatever they wanted, and it was always trying to reconcile their personal angst with religion, and it was so whiny, and I just just get so tired of it, and talking with you, I'm articulating those ideas because they wouldn't pick up the burden to try to articulate what was right and what was good. They were burying that under what they wanted, and it's like throwing corrosive acid on a statue, like, or something. It's like you're watching this thing that is good and beautiful that's already covered by evil, and you're just eating away at it for your own, like, nourishment, or what you think will nourish you. And I don't know, it's not to pat ourselves on the back. I really felt what you said there. Something that difficult is a challenge, of course, because it's difficult, but that also makes it worthwhile. Um, it's hard to do because there's so much against it. It's hard to articulate those truths because there's a whole world against it.
Yeah, and I mean the other difficulty is how do you express those truths without repulsing people?
Yeah.
I mean, that's always been a major concern in my work. There in the Domes of Calrathia, there are frequent dialogues about God and God's nature. And when I was writing it, I was desperately trying to distance myself from anything that could be considered a Sunday school lecture.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Like that was I was desperately always thinking in the back of my head, I can't let this come across as Ned Flanders and his two whiny brats.
And that's a whole discussion too, because like when the Simpsons started, Ned Flanders was like the guy that Homer wanted to be. He's like he's got the great kids, great wife, and he's all ripped and he's happy. But yeah, I know what you mean. Hey, talk about another trope was taking Flanders, who wasn't ideal, and then they beat him into the ground and made him awful. Um, have you? I'm not trying to make this about this, but I bring it up because it's the topic. Are you familiar with? I know you know the title, but are you familiar with Dostoevsky's work?
I've read Crime and Punishment. I've gotten through a bit of the Brothers Karamazov.
Yeah,
That's it.
I know he's a bit long-winded, but I love every second of it. But it seems to me, for his time, he did kind of what we're talking about. He would just have characters go off and go espouse the depths of their soul and their opinion on the darkness of the world and their place in it. And it seems to me, I'm no scholar on it by any means, but it seemed to me a lot of his way of answering this question was to have his characters ask a lot of questions.
Yeah, I would also say that Dostoevsky had one advantage that we don't, and that was, people didn't have access to as many art mediums as they do now. He could reliably. I mean, I know he suffered incredible economic hardship, but I can't imagine Dostoevsky being published today. I can't imagine any pre-modern author being published today on Amazon and experiencing the universal acclaim that they do.
Oh, I just can't. You're absolutely right. And that's the strange. Well, I shouldn't say strange because we understand it, but that is the perversion, is that we have more access to everything ever and more tyranny almost than ever in so many ways. It's the internet used to be kind of like a Wild West, and now it's literally it's like what, 3 websites now, or that's what it feels like. And like I said, no, I'm not here to pat you on the back, man, but that's what I want to applaud you for. Is like when I looked at your Substack and your works, I'm like, oh, like especially Royal Road, which I was not familiar with. I'm like, man, this looks like an old school website. This is cool. Like it's just crappy enough. Like I love that stuff. Like that's how ours is built. It's like it's just crappy enough to make it feel like it wasn't made by Amazon or something,
Yeah, I kind of I've been aware of Royal Road for a long time. I wanted to make my fiction part of my Substack, and you can find some of the older drafts there. But I think Royal Road is going to be where I post my fiction in the future. I'm going to just separate my fiction from my nonfiction. Not out of choice. It's just that Substack is a woeful platform for trying to create fiction. Oh yeah. First off, I can't organize anything into a book. So I'm posting individual chapters. And on top of that, I have to include hyperlinks every single time so they can click to the next chapter. That's not automatic. I have to go in there, add a link to chapter 2, link to chapter 3. And
the precious minutes it cost you.
But it's sort of all right. Those precious minutes don't sound a lot on paper.
I'm just messing with you.
But in terms of like a viewer, every single second of inconvenience goes against you.
Oh yeah,
exponentially.
You're like, man, people have short attention spans. They gotta stay with me here. I'm sharing your links right now in the chat, and I will add them to the description as well. I should have thought of that earlier. Let me put this in here. I think Substack. I was very impressed. Man. It takes a lot to be prolific, particularly in today's world with so many distractions and so much crap. And It's weird. Like I remember a time before, and it wasn't just because I was younger, because I was still an adult, but it didn't feel like there was always a cloud over your head all the time. And I'm not trying to beat it into the ground, but I don't know. Like I said, I tried to stay out of politics for a long time, but after this election, I'm like, hey, maybe things don't have to be so awful all the time. And that's another thing I was thinking about and wanted to talk about with you is like, where did the and like I said, maybe this is more of a Catholic idea, but like, it's okay to wish for a good king, you know?
Oh yeah, I mean, like, it's kind of, we all want an Aragorn in our lives.
Yeah, and I think that's okay. You know. Do you mind if we go to some questions from the chat real quick?
Sure.
Which I know that's a cringe sentence, but I don't know what else to say. All right, Stephen Townsend. He had a question about your November 5th thread about the future of fiction. In one part, you talked about the elves coming from a view of the world. Could you expound?
So I'll also include the. You also said when we think of dragons, we think of winged fire lizards, and that ties into the same thing with the elves.
Okay.
So when Tolkien was writing Lord of the Rings, he drew from an incredibly rich background of folklore, and I imagine he also invested quite a bit of his Christianity into the work. And so the view of elves in Lord of the Rings comes across symbolically as almost as if a pre-fall version of mankind, a man without his original sin. Not quite, because the elves are obviously a different race, and there are other connotations there, but they draw from that well.
Sure.
Meanwhile, so they're part of a religious folklore tradition. They have a lot of symbolic connotations. Their part in the novel is filled with meaning that can be attached to that. Meanwhile, modern elves are a D&D race that have pointy ears and live a few centuries.
Mm-hmm. Their spiritual significance and metaphysical significance is gone.
Yep, and the same thing with dragons. I mean, dragons used to be a symbol of Satan. There used to be concrete, religious, symbolic meanings behind the usage of dragons. There used to be a rich tradition of them, and that allows you to express yourself in a dialogue that is so much deeper than winged fire lizards that happen to also talk.
A featherless but scaled bird.
Yeah. but that's sort of we like to say the left will hollow out your religion and use it as a skin suit. Well, they also hollow out your language and use it as a skin suit as well.
And legends.
Yeah. I mean, literally, the words we have today are incredibly materialistic. They're deprived of all symbolic and religious meaning. And I was talking about this in one of my threads. The Europeans, when they spoke of dragons, they could access both the material and the spiritual dimension of those words. Meanwhile, we've separated them into the dragon is the purely spiritual word, but it's an imaginary, fantastical creature. Dinosaur is the material version of that word. And, they're completely divorced from one another. And if you ever want to have a conversation of metaphysics or religion or symbology, I think Jordan Peterson actually had a.
With Dawkins, yeah.
He's fallen away from the idol in my eyes as I was when I was very, very young, when I was a teenager in high school. But like you saw that in the in his recent conversation with Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins was like, "Oh, you're talking about dragons." And, like Jordan Peterson's in this purely symbolic world. Richard Dawkins is in this completely material world, and never the two shall meet.
Yeah. No, that's a wonderful thing. And I'm looking for and I guess religion is the only term I can think of, but I'm looking for a proper word or phrase to unite this, and I'm really glad you brought that up. I'm really glad that question was asked because I've been thinking about that a lot myself. In the only, I'll start with this. I have a friend named Brody, and we met at a horror convention. He came up and looked at our book, and our book's not horror, but he immediately got some of the more esoteric and religious themes of it just from looking through it. And he's an interesting guy to talk to. He's not a Christian yet, but he expressed the term magical thinking, and he's not a magic with a K guy. He's a smart kid that likes to read. But he wanted to talk about that idea of what you just said of reuniting the material and the spiritual, or the material and the metaphysical, and that's the best way he could think of it was magical thinking, because of in that tradition it is giving importance to symbols and symbolism, which, to Peterson's credit, that's what he does try to do, is try to live in such a way that everything has meaning, whether good or bad meaning. But that all feels like religion light,
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I know a lot of people in the sphere who really dislike the idea of reenchantment. And I'm kind of ambivalent towards it because I think the symbols have to assert themselves organically. I don't think you can willfully, return to a medieval mindset in any way, shape, or form. They say, you got to LARP before you embrace the real thing, and that's true for a lot of things. But I don't think it's true for that kind of collective reenchantment where the symbol suddenly regains its power because we all will it so. I mean, the symbol has to have power beforehand. It has to have power in of itself before it expresses itself.
Yeah, otherwise it's a facade. It's a lie.
Yeah.
No, that's beautifully put. But that's the thing, is it either has that power and exists objectively and can therefore assert that power, or it doesn't. And of course, or for those who aren't familiar, I mean, this. I mean, but that's the foundation of Christianity, and the logos of God becoming man, the transcendent coming into the material, the physical, being of greater importance than we ever realized because God himself put it on. That it was always an enchantment, but he showed it, he displayed it. So
yeah. I really dislike Jordan Peterson because he'll get 99% of the way there.
Well, and if he had Jesus, he'd be 100% there.
he's always a step behind, and he has to take that final step towards Catholicism, or it all falls about. Like his entire worldview falls down in shambles because it's like 3 or 4 iterations behind where we are now.
I didn't get to finish it. It was like I'm not a Daily Wire fan. I've never been. I liked Peterson before he was on the Daily Wire. But it was like a roundtable discussion on Exodus, I think it was, where it was him, I think Ben Shapiro, and I think it was a Dennis Prager and a Jonathan Pageau, who I know isn't Catholic, he's Orthodox. But that whole discussion, it seemed like really is like Pageau was the only one that had any kind of coherent view that didn't sound completely monstrous. It's like you would hear Dennis Prager talking. He's like, "Oh my God, this is what this guy thinks. Like this is what." And I don't know. I'm not putting Pageau on a pedestal. I'm just saying of that discussion, because he had a Christian worldview of some kind. I know there's animosity between the Catholics and the Orthodox. He at least made the most sense.
Yeah, I haven't been tracking that scene for a long while now.
You're not missing anything.
Yeah, I mean, like immediately after Jordan Peterson got his benzo withdrawal, he was never the same again. And personally, I've moved on.
You were better on drugs.
I didn't intend to say that, but you look at him before and after. Like before, he sounded sensical, after he bursts into tears every 5 minutes into the interview.
It's like I wasn't a fan of them, but the band Fall Out Boy, their singer was like this chunky guy, and he lost weight, and like people started coming to shows with signs saying "We liked you better fat."
That's funny.
That's what that reminds me of. You should go to one of his talks and be like, "I liked you on drugs."
No, but like I was able to take the leap he couldn't. When I departed high school and left the teenager mindset.
Yeah. Well, I think that is what's missing, and I don't say that like ideologically as a Christian. It's just like because I've heard him articulate this dream he had where he saw all the kings and rulers of the earth in a graveyard rise up out of the dead, and they all took their swords and they knelt before the image of Christ. And he's like, which is like the most badass dream you could have, and it was wasted on this guy because he was like, what does that mean? It's like, what do you think it means, Jordan? Like, the man who said, I am the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. What do you think it means?
I wish I had that dream. I have a lot of very vivid dreams. None of them not great.
I know, like the last dream I had, I think I was at a Dairy Queen or something. Like
I had the Omnitrix on my arm.
That's not so bad.
Yeah.
Stephen Townsend, he says, would you mind explaining how organic enchantment would work? It seems like dinosaurs were real and the stories were a follow-on of something real. So would we find things people are organically scared of today, like the plague or car crashes or something, and derive stories from that?
So I guess to address the point, first, dinosaurs were real and the stories were a follow-on of something real. I don't necessarily. See, here's the thing. I kind of have to tailor these conversations to your specific power level, because I do walk in areas where people believe that dragons actually were a very real part of medieval medieval life.
If you want to go there. That's fine.
I mean, personally, I don't necessarily subscribe to that view. But on the other hand, as far as I see it, our materialistic notions of the world have been completely discredited in my mind, especially with what scientific institutions have become today. They just don't hold the same weight for me as they once did. I mean, for example, every 2-3 months or so, archaeologists come out and say Herodotus was actually talking the truth about a new thing. Oh man, the Scythians didn't use human leather or whatever. Oh well, he was actually telling the truth. And for me, my mind has sort of been like I've sort of just left that material that materialistic current event view of the world that our scientific institutions want us to be currently trapped in. And I'll say, all right, I don't know about a lot of things that have happened in history. I'm just going to keep an open mind on that. Because you've lost so much credibility in the past 5 years that I am at this point willing to say, I don't trust you to say that dragons or dinosaurs weren't real, whatever you want to call them in medieval life. Like after all the bullshit you fed me, after the COVID pandemic, I was promised one shot that was 100% effective. After all that bullshit.
I was promised one shot that was 100% effective against the disease with a 99% survival rate.
And it wasn't just COVID. It's everything. The rot is so far and it goes so far down. Like I literally do not trust anything these people have to say anymore. I don't trust anything I've read out of my textbooks except for the basic stuff, obviously. But like it's just
I just imagined you opening a textbook and it says published in 1923 and you're like, sus.
I mean, and before, like, I can imagine someone watching this and being like, how could you? How dare you? Well, go on a YouTube video, search this, put this in your search bar. All that stuff you learned in the 1990s that's now obsolete or wrong.
Oh no, I completely agree with you, man. I mean, I think healthy skepticism has to come back because, my God, like we don't, and the more you research, especially like the kind of guys that stood out, like Tesla and those kind of dudes, like they all said the same thing. They're like, these people don't know what they're talking about, and it's amazing the amount of fraud or lying or just downright stupidity and narcissism. Sorry, my mic keeps popping. That exist in that, and I mean, guys like Lewis and Tolkien wrote about it with their own colleagues. And in fields, even as like literature, they wrote about it at the time. Like a lot of these guys have no idea what they're talking about. They just make stuff up.
Yeah, the foundational study that all of Alzheimer's research was based upon was revealed to be
Yeah,
fraud.
and that personally pissed me off because my dad like died from like early onset like dementia and Alzheimer's and all of that stuff that was connected because I didn't know what it was. And I'm gonna let that go. You can't be mad at some magical figurative body of people that doesn't exist. Um, but that happens. People don't realize that happens all the time, and
It's
there
still
is
happening. They think
yeah,
that it's corrected just
and
because it got revealed. It's not.
anything that is all that theoretical, and that's what's so strange is the more science we've gotten, the more theoretical and the more magical thinking it's become because so much of it is so disassociated from reality. Like, does this idea work in reality? No. Okay, then it's wrong. I think Thomas Sowell said that where he's like, if only like most academics could be judged on their work the same way that an architect is judged on his work, like does the building stand or does it not?
Yeah, I mean, if people knew how much of the foundation was rotten and how much they taught was just blatantly false,
Hmm.
like I don't think they could handle it.
Well,
I don't.
I think people are I think there is a collective apathy, a good collective apathy towards that, especially that kind of elitism. And I think this election proved it.
Yeah,
People do not care anymore. Like, I don't care what an expert on TV has to say. I don't care what a guy, because like it's a joke. I mean, you go on Twitter, it's like something here. Here's why you're wrong, and then everything they say in their field is just awful. Like it's wrong. I saw a guy today and try to like he was like some mathematician trying to explain why 2 plus 2 isn't always 4, and his reasoning was, well, if you have 2 dozen eggs plus 2 dozen eggs, that's 48 eggs.
yeah. Listen. If our entire scientific institutions were willing to bow down to the trans ideology, which
Mm-hmm.
there could not be a more blatantly false idol to throw yourself down towards. If all of them were willing to bend the knee to that and say this is true, then you can't trust them to say anything else that's true.
Yeah, especially when it involves children.
Like there was never a more blatantly false idol that could have caused so much destruction to so many innocents than the trans ideology. And our entire intellectual apparatus bent the knee.
Mm-hmm.
And
And,
if
and
that shouldn't
in no
discredit them
time.
forever, I don't know what would.
I 100% agree. And they did it in no time like that. And that's what, and I'm not trying to get apocalyptic here, and I'm not trying to fearmonger because I don't believe in that stuff. I don't think dooming helps anybody, but I did have a click, and it's when I saw Dr. Fauci on TV. I was like, oh, that's how the Antichrist works. Like, it's like that's how you can convince a billion people to put something on their head or their hand really quickly. And like I said, I'm not trying to dramatize things, but seeing people listen to that guy, I was like, that's the guy we're listening to. Like that guy clearly is lying. I don't even know him, but I can tell he's lying. And I don't know. It's I'm saying all that to say I don't believe in getting down. I don't believe in dooming. I believe first of all, in Christ, and I believe in art as the last bastion for the soul now. And that's why I'm doing these talks, and that's why I wanted to talk to you. Is I see that fire, I see that flame, I see that frustration, like everything we're talking about, even from an intellectual exercise. Because you sound like a learned individual. I just studied music. I don't know what I'm talking about. But even that, though, everything we're discussing, you yourself and myself included, but you yourself, you have to channel it through art. There's something important about that, you know?
Yeah, I would say particularly for writing, it's a bit mysterious to me because it's always been sort of an impulse that was in me rather than something that I chose to do. Certainly, like there's no material incentives in it. I suppose. I suppose I might say I'm chasing the dream of being self sufficient, but I'm nowhere close to that.
But can I stop you there though? Like if you, but your situation would be the same if a lottery fell out of heaven and landed in your lap. But you still have that inclination.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah, I think that's the answer. I think that tells you something, you know, and that tells us all something. And I'm not trying to talk over you, man. Sorry, I'm just I get really excited. I've spent probably my whole life trying to do what I'm doing now, which is just talking to people that I find interesting. Because surrounded by people I didn't find interesting my whole life. But no, I think I know I'm repeating myself, but I think that is so important. I think that is more important now than ever. I think it is more important than political theory. Don't tell the dissonant guys I said that. I think it is, and I can go into that in just a second. I think it is more important than um almost anything right now. I think art is more important than almost anything. And like I said, I stay out of politics for the longest time. I do find it interesting. I do find political theories interesting. I've read the far left because what else do you read in college, right? That's the default. And I've read some of the more right wing stuff. And the thing, and I am not, believe me, stop me right here. I am not saying they're the same. But what I found at the core of the fringes is a thirst for power. And I understand that thirst because they won't change. They both believe that they have the mandate from heaven to do good, and I'm not making that a bad Tolkien allegory of power. So stay with me here. What I don't find is a reverence for art. I find a um, beating down and domination of it for propaganda. That's where I stop on anything that I'm studying. If I find art being not treated as a muse but treated as a whore, that's when I check out.
Well, to argue for the favor on the guys on the right,
Sure.
you'll notice this in the discourse that the left will always go back to the same 4 or 5 talking points. There's never ever any evolution in their thinking because in order for there to be an evolutionary thinking, they would have to approach truth and accommodate truth.
Mm-hmm.
But the discourse on their side it's stale, it's dead. You've got a few tired thinkers who have, they're well past their prime. Whereas on the right, you definitely have a vivacity there that is so much more energetic and powerful. At least discourse wise, they're not the establishments. They don't have power in the sense that like they can't command the institutional respect that someone like Steven Pinker, I don't know how to say his name, or Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins can. But they can speak the truth that those guys can't, and that gives them power. Different sort of power, but it gives them power. And I think that what's been happening on the distant right has been by and large a very good thing. I know there's a lot of drama. There's a lot of there's a few bad actors. I'm not going to lie. And some people might point at the distant right and say, oh, hey, this, we haven't really accomplished anything. But I would say in terms of affecting the national discourse, we've accomplished a lot. There are options on the table that there weren't before, and there've been accusations and criticisms leveled that we would get censored for earlier. So I think there's been progress.
No, I agree. I think that's where more interesting ideas are. And one of them is, and you kind of mentioned this earlier. I know a term that's tossed around, and I think it's a good term, is the post-war consensus. And I don't mean that in an anti-Semitic sense. I mean, and I know that's a whole loaded thing. I'm not interested. What I mean is what you expressed. We're born and swim in the liberal-minded, the neoliberal matrix. There's no getting around that. And as you said, like, that's in our language, and that's very hard to get rid of. It's strange to think about. I saw something, maybe it was yesterday or today. Is, of course, the word fascism gets thrown around so much right now because Donald Trump's a fascist, right? And all I could think is, like, man, there were empires before fascism, right? And people considered empires good when they were under them. And many of them considered empires good when they were freed from their ruler and another empire conquered them. And even that term wasn't the only term. There were tribes, there were nations, there were families, there were kings, queens, monarchies. There were so many unbelievable terms, so many of them that weren't the term fascism. But we live in the shadow of that because it's been beaten into our heads for so long. It just blows my mind. I don't know. I'm trying to tie it all together. What you said, that with the control of language and with the absolute stupidity of academics.
Well, I mean, fascism doesn't. It's not a word that indicates any political ideology. It's just a signal word for the enemies of the left.
Exactly.
That's all it is.
And that's an old idea. I know that the communists wrote that a long time ago. They said, if we can't find anything else, just call them fascists.
Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to study it for its political ideology of fascism itself, you're barking up the wrong tree. It's the same thing as being called racist. It doesn't mean it. Like, it literally the word just means you are the enemy of the left, and therefore you deserve to be destroyed. That's all it means.
It just disturbs me. There's people I know that whistle goes off and they react. Anything, like, it's the slightest thing. It is weird. It is a religion, and we're born into it, and it's just so strange. I mean, that I'm not gonna bog you down with that here, but there's not a lot of people you can talk to about that honestly and in depth. And I know, I mean, are you familiar with James Lindsay? I'm sure.
I'm vaguely familiar with him. I've checked out of that crowd a long time ago.
Well, I say that because he's trying to fight what he calls the woke right, and he's losing terribly because again, he's not a Christian either, and that's what I think that battle comes down to, as it did on the left, is like Christianity, however you want to align it with a political movement, will divide itself from that because, and I'm going to use this term, I can explain it. Christianity is a totalizing religion. It does not share power with other ideas.
No.
It's very hard to trailer hitch Christianity onto something, you know?
Actually, I mean, there are forms of Christianity, but all right, so there are forms of Christianity that will absolutely compromise to power. There are forms of Christianity that can incorporate ideas into itself and remain Christian. It's not necessarily totalitarian in the sense that it wipes individual, let's just say, ethnic identity.
Yeah.
Or ethnic identity, and it even adopts religious symbolism into itself. I mean, just look at Our Lady of Guadalupe, where this Marian apparition happened, where I forget, there's a specific word for people who encounter these apparitions. But basically, Aztec symbolism was incorporated into Christianity. So the religious symbolism gets incorporated, and the ideas can be reintegrated into Christianity. It's not totalitarianism in the sense that everything just gets wiped away into this one blank slate sort of thing.
Well,
Everyone, everywhere, all at once.
No, can I stop you right there just to add to it, because I agree with you. Maybe I phrased it wrong. What I'm saying is, when something comes in contact with Christianity, Christianity has to be at the top of the hierarchy of it.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I should have phrased that better.
But in terms of the woke right, it's it's such a ridiculous name that are you really going to call anything that takes itself seriously and believes in itself woke?
That's the question I want to pose to Lindsay and people with that idea, because he is a staunch liberal and he's open about that. But it's the same thing with Peterson. He does not, and Lindsay, to his credit, has tried, I think, to understand Christianity, but you can't without the Holy Spirit. And that's a bold statement, but that's the belief of Christianity. He does not know how to wrangle Christianity taken seriously.
No, I don't think I think he just wants to return to the 90s. At least that's my read of him from afar.
And I don't think people realize the girl power and the racial riots of the 90s.
Or that the 90s led us exactly to where we are now.
Exactly. Oh, and so did the 80s and the 70s. And I guess you could say maybe the 60s started it as the modern form of it, But how far back are you going to go? We're going to go back to Catholicism, which I'd rather live under Catholicism than what we have now. And I'm a Protestant.
Yeah, I don't think you can ever really go back in terms of what we need to look for. I think that we need to look for pre-modern things that can survive modernity and will revive themselves post-modernity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the only real true things in this world are the things that survive the passing of the age, and that's what we should tie ourselves to.
I think you're absolutely correct in that. I think art, true, and that's why we call some things timeless, and the term universal before that became what it means. There are some things that are recognized as this came from outside of time, and now that it's here, that's why it withstands time. And I mean, and that's a biblical principle. I forget, I think it was Peter or Paul, you have to forgive me, the description of the fire that comes and wipes away everything that is not eternal,
Yep.
I'll throw up this other talk from Stephen Year's chat. So would people have to separate from materialism and falsehood to organically create their own stories from their fears and beliefs?
So I think, all right. So I think there are degrees of separation here. So I do absolutely think that you need to separate yourself from a materialistic view of the world. I mean, there are certainly, you can convert to a religion and adopt spiritual premises into your life, and I think that'll be a great help to you. But there's also a realm that goes beyond that in terms of storytelling, where I think we might call it intuition, we might call it, I don't know, spiritual. I don't want to say enlightenment. Enlightenment has too many bad connotations around it. But you take a step on this journey, and you realize there's 900,000 more steps to go. And you sort of have to go down that path and see where it takes you, instead of, I have a list of 10 commandments here and they provide me everything I need to tell a good story.
It's a good point. And people have made that point before. And I think Peterson repeated it. It's hard to dodge the guy when you have certain conversations. the difference between, I forgot who it was. I don't know if it was Nietzsche or whomever, and Ayn Rand. Whereas one of them um, wrote to kind of understand what they were saying, to figure out where they were getting, versus Rand, who started with a premise and just wrote it. And I'm not going to go off on the topic too much. I was a fan of Rand's, some of her work. Like, I thought Anthem was a beautiful piece of work. I didn't really care for Atlas Shrugged, but I can understand that. I mean, writing and art. This is part of what I think the beauty of art is. The beauty of art is the revelation, and I mean that in the proper term, like the unveiling or the revealing of what you're making as you make it. And I think that's a divine aspect. I mean, God knows all things, of course, but I think He also enjoys the process of not just creating, but watching His creation become what it was supposed to be and what it can be.
Yeah, I would say Flannery O'Connor, circling back to what you said a bit earlier, talked about, she's a Catholic author, very famous Southern Catholic author. She talked about people who write fiction as if it were essays. And she basically said, just write the essay. And if you're able to boil down a story into a theme that's like 3 or 4 sentences long, then you should have just written the 3 or 4 sentences and spared us the book.
That reminds me. I mean, are you familiar with the cesspool that is called BookTube or Bookstagram?
I'm vaguely aware of it.
I watched. I spent about like 8 months going through it because I thought it was funny. It was, at least a couple of years ago. It was a lot of young women, well intentioned. I assume just talking about how you should write and how to write, what are themes and plots, and it was everything you would get from a college 101 class on how to write. And then the class was probably called How to Write. And when you read anything of value, it is the complete opposite of everything they've ever said. it, it is the everything everything that's written now. It seems like, especially everything you see on the shelves, is it's a product, it's commodity, it's all the sharp edges are shaved off until and auto-tuned until it's a Taylor Swift album. um you're not going to get anything, you're not going to discover anything. It's going to be everything that you've already been shown and grown up in this view that dominates our world.
I mean, personally, for how I write, I've always, all right, so I've had a beginning, I've had ending, everything in the middle, I kind of work towards and come up with as I go along. I mean, I have like 3 or 4 main beats, but there's so much in my own storytelling that you would be surprised that happened on the spot, on the fly, and then evolved into major aspects of the story.
And that's the that's the art part of art. Let me get my thoughts collected. I'm sorry, I speak very quickly, and sometimes my brain is either too far ahead or too far behind. Um, Everything, the modern world, especially art, is built kind of like an assembly line, kind of like I don't know if you're familiar with music production. It doesn't matter, but everything can be quantized now. When you record something, especially digitally with MIDI, which is what 90% of music is now, you can literally go through it and click a quantize button, and what that does is it snaps it to the closest beat grid, so you can't possibly be off time. And when you do that, you can copy paste everything in blocks, and now music is not waves and it's not beats. It's blocks. It's like Tetris blocks that you stack together. That is what a lot of art is, and how we've been taught to do art. There is no exploration, there's no discovery. It's your will dominating something. You have beginning, middle, end, and then not only do you have that, not only are those things predetermined by our current view and how things should be, our current religion, but then how you do those things are. So you have idea that's been given to you have method that's been given to you, and then you have execution that's been given to you. That's not art. That's not even being a human. So what I'm saying is I applaud what you just said, the discovery of something as you make it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna say there is no rules to art. I mean, there are certainly standards, but if you forsake discovery and trying in grasping for something more in favor of just formula and algorithm, then you're never going to make anything new. I'll say that much.
That's what, and I keep circling back to this because it just happened, and I feel like it is important, especially for art and our culture right now. The election of Donald Trump, I think, has scared people, not even because of the person, but because of what comes with that person, and that is dynamism. And that is almost necessarily, in a certain sense, a male trait, and what sports figures call explosive energy, to be able to just on the spot. And that's what art is to me. It seems like it is dynamism. It is a spark that can at any minute just erupt. And I think what you just described is super 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 important for people to understand, and is something that should be strived after. It is this idea of courage, of adventure, and fearlessness, that you work a 12-hour shift, whatever you got to do, your personal life, whatever, like, girl you're with, or your wife, your kids, and then going to the mines that are your creative project, sticking your shovel in the dirt and getting it done, and finding the jewel there as you do it, instead of just being an automaton that's a slave to the algorithm. I I don't know, man. That's a lot, and like I'm good to go for like another hour or two if you go. But I think that's a pretty good place to end. Um, if you, I don't want to bore you, I don't want to keep you, I don't want to pontificate. Though I love you as a sounding board. You've answered a lot of questions for me.
Well, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. I guess like, is there anything else that was particularly itching at your mind?
I
Or
don't know, man. I'd love to have you back on if you would be up for that. What I don't want to do is I don't want to chase too many rabbit holes. I would like you to, if we don't have a large audience, of course, but would you like to, is there anything you would like to talk about that is your art, or anything you would like to promote of yourself while you're here?
well, all right. So I guess I'll talk about my three main
Yeah.
serials for a little bit. I never really get used to the elevator pitches. I never really like talking about, like, I've always tried to avoid being the shill online who
I
puts his
understand.
advertisements in every single reply. Like, I've always been scared of developing that. But I'll
Buy my shit.
um, so I guess I'll start with The Last Human, since you brought that one up first, I think.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
so The Last Human is all my stories. These three projects are exploring collapse in some way. The Last Human is set in a post-human galaxy where humanity are the precursors of the setting, and most of the aliens are actually descended from humanity, from species that were uplifted from Earth. And basically, humanity is the forerunners. I only know the Halo one, but we all know the stereotype.
Yeah.
And the story is set with a humanity is currently in collapse. It's a diaspora where humanity is a nearly extinct species, and the story follows this slave child, this slave human, and he's rescued. And the story is basically his life going from child to grappling with this extreme loneliness and extreme sorrow at basically growing up after the collapse of civilization.
Hmm.
or at least his civilization, his identity, his home. Essentially, he never knew his home, and going from that to a galactic warlord. Um, so that's the impetus of the story.
So kind of like a great man of history.
Yeah, he's a great man of history. Giga Heroes is it deals with collapse and sort of the collapse of virtue. I was really fascinated with the trend in comic books and movies where basically what they do is they take Superman and say, "What if he's evil?"
Yeah,
And that's
deconstruction is crap.
yeah, they've been doing that for the past 10 years. I mean, it's basically the same cynical story over and over again. So Giga Heroes was my attempt at doing a reconstruction where instead of taking it from a good place and deconstructing it, I take it from a bad place and I slowly try to reconstruct it to an idea of heroism emerging out of that really nihilistic, really, really bad place. And that's kind of the impetus behind that story. The third story in the first book is complete in that one, is The Domes of Calrathia. And that story, it's definitely the most complex out of the three. It's one I haven't really gotten my elevator pitch down quite yet for, but it deals with just collapse of institutions. The story follows this warrior called Cirrus, and he's exiled from his guild. And he's sent on this suicide mission to take an illuminated manuscript to this religious holy site. And it deals with it's probably like out of the three in terms of trying to struggle in a collapsing world, the Domes of Calrathia is the most downbeat and somber out of the three. And it's trying to get at when everything is just falling apart around you, how do you scrounge meaning in this essentially post-apocalyptic landscape?
Yeah, and what's wonderful, and I would encourage everyone to go read it. I would not have someone on here. I wouldn't talk to someone whose art I didn't think was good. I don't believe in that. You know the guy that'll pat you on the back, shake your hand, and stab you.
Fair enough.
Literally happens in music. Like if the guy who pays you will stab you. Depends on the venue, but no, wonderful work. I would strongly recommend everybody go do it. I'm going to be promoting it on our X thing, if we have to keep saying X now, on Twitter, and your Substack as well. And whoever listens, whoever gets to hear this, whether you agree with Isaac or not, his Substack is worth checking out. He's very articulate and his thoughts are well put together. And my God, dude, you're prolific, man. Like that's what really astonished me. Like I thought what Josh and I were doing with pumping out like 600 pages a year was ridiculous, man. You're killing this.
600 pages a year is really good. I've been I don't know. I need to step up my pace, honestly. Like as soon as I focus on one project, I feel like I've left all the other projects to the wayside for far too long.
I understand that completely. I started this, like wanted to talk to artists because everything sucks. I'm making a video game that goes with our universe, and I'll take this up here. I gotta do it. My artist is texting me. I'll take the second to promote my stuff because I have to. See, I feel that same thing too. You feel slimy, you know?
Yeah, it's just.
The Godfall universe, global elites have acquired an alien metal that lets them control the minds of others. Apollyon 20XX is when that is happening, the rise of God, and then Biofile Kolga takes place about 1,000 years later. We have Apollyon 20XX Volume 2 coming out December 1st. That will be on Indiegogo, Fund My Comic, and Kickstarter. You can pick up these two books here on our website, godfalluniverse.com. We also have short films. We have the Lamentations and the Revelations. These are in-world prose, poetry, and photography that go along with it, peripheral. That's about that's 300-400 pages of art for you guys to check out. We've got the short films, and we've got a novel hopefully coming. I mean, it's done. We just haven't released it yet. We might release it maybe this December. But Isaac, thank you so much, man. I'm not trying to cut you short. What I don't want to do is beat you down chasing too many rabbits. This has been a very, very enjoyable conversation, at least on my part. I would love to have you back on, man. And Godspeed, dude. I'll be praying for you in every aspect of everything. And I would especially love to talk about Catholicism a lot more with you. That the theology of it really fascinates me.
Thank you for having me on.
All right. Have a wonderful day, dude.
You too.